Well, this is Things Hidden, a podcast where you don't know what's going to happen because we get into current events, we get into headlines, but we also pull from history and anthropology with a mimetic theory lens guiding some of the insights we pull. We also pull from the work of Mr. Rogers and other intellectuals that have impacted our lives. So I'm joined here today by my good friend Surit Dasgupta, who joins me from India. How you doing, Surit?
I'm fine. How are you?
Great. And I also have my friend from Washington State, Shannon Braswell. How you doing, Shannon?
What's going on, man? I'm good.
All right. Well, it's great to have you guys here. And, a lot of crazy things always in the news. It's not even like a surprise anymore, each thing that we see. But I want to kind of get into history first to set the table and then maybe use that as a way to kind of understand some of the things that are going around us. Surit was telling me that it looks like India, for example, is going to force a vaccine on mandatory. Is that correct, Surit?
Yeah, I was listening to the news right now, and a couple of health experts and various other experts were on, and they were talking about introducing some kind of a certificate or a social card, a vaccination card that will be linked to our social system, a credit system, which is known as Aadhaar, and it will be, it will effectively be, determining whether we can go about in society without being vaccinated and so on. So it'll impact it a lot.
And does that have to be legislatively voted on, or is that just one politician's idea, or is that what's going to happen?
I don't think there's going to be any vote because there was no vote on whether they'll be imposing any quarantine or so. Why should there be any vote in this matter?
And of course,
so usually there's no vote on any political, edicts. There's usually it's very centralized over here.
So you have a rubber stamp parliament, right?
Yeah, it's stamp. There's a stamp of approval by the prime minister, and it goes.
And
there'll probably be some debate in the parliament or something like that, but not many people are opposed to these kinds of ideas. It's right. It's largely socialism there and socialism here, both ways.
And are they still quarantining you guys, or is everything open back up?
It just started opening up right now again. There was a momentary release from the quarantine, but they shut it down again, and right now they're back up. So shops are thankfully opening up right now, but there's still restrictions going on. There's still social distancing and all these things that are happening. Masks are still mandatory. If they catch you without a mask, you're going to be fined.
What's the Indian word for Karen over there?
It's not been invented yet. It's probably Indian. Indian, that's Karen.
Yeah.
So is there access to fresh meat?
Well, I don't know. We get it from the butcher's shop. So should be fresh. I mean, they do clean it.
Surit was telling me before when they were during the lockdown, he didn't have access to fresh meat. And of course, we all know in science that fresh meat is the foundation for a proper immune system, a proper diet. Having access to healthy omega-3 fatty acids is the key to having a good immune system. So we can see that these folks who think they know better than us, they actually treat human beings as if they're fodder, not as living human beings who have sovereignty over their health choices, preventing him for months from getting out and getting proper sunshine, exercise, and access to fatty meats like mutton, right?
Yes, that's correct. Butcher shops and all these slaughterhouses, they were closed down during quarantine.
And we all know what fruitarians look like after they eat fruit only for so long. So we know what that diet would have done to you, sir, if you had been forced in that quarantine to continue not eating meat. I just want to put that disclaimer out there. Shannon, we're not sponsored by steaks here yet, but we're working on it. Shannon, I wanted to turn to you to give some historical background because you're our history guy, and you always bring some historical interest to the conversations of the headlines that we explore. Yeah. And I'm looking at, you recently have been exploring the book Sacrifice by Rene Girard, which is a lecture. It's an audio book and an ebook and what have you, looking at mimetic theory and its application to Hindu culture and the Brahmins, right? So I wanted to kind of ask you, you had expressed to me some interest and some insights that you had seen from that book. It's a short little audio book. You finish it in a couple hours. Yeah. What overall was the biggest highlight for you? Because it's kind of like, okay, we're doing a show that deals with current events, but why should we stop and think, and what can we learn about anthropology from the light of Hinduism that you learned from that book? And then we'll go back to Surit to see what his angle is.
Okay, great. Yeah. So the way that I, read it is it's a 4-part lecture, maybe 3-part lecture. The beginning is kind of short. He just kind of does an intro. And then when he gets into chapter 3, he describes the ancient hymns, which are the Rig Vedas. And so these are hymns or poems that describe, how the world came into being, and it's kind of like very, very poetic, but he talks about what he calls I think it's hymn 90, which is about the god Purusha, but Purusha in Sanskrit means man. Right? Yes. So he was trying to indicate that this God was first a human being, and that he was a giant, or a being of great size. He talks about him having multiple eyes, multiple hands, arms, and things of that nature. So he's kind of a god of physical abundance, and he says that in order for his theory to work, which is the idea that myths of the gods are rooted in some kind of sacrifice, that they were first victims, he has to be able to recall or pinpoint where the sacrifice is, right? Like, and why this god is sacrificed, or how that god originated, came into being. And he says he can't find that for Purusha in the Rig Vedas. So he has to go to the Brahmanas, which I think are a later text. And he finds another god, Prajapati, the lord of the creatures. Right? And he finds a story in that myth where Prajapati has committed incest. And so he says that, that is the transgression of Prajapati. And that is what kind of leads to the other gods you know, basically dismembering him, or trying to do the same thing that, you know, was perhaps done to, that was, you know, similar to what happened to Purusha. So, you know, he's trying to lay emphasis on the fact that myths, such as those found in the Vedas, are, you know, their characteristic is similar to what you would find in the, you know, the ancient Greek stories, like, you know, Dionysus, or, you know, what have you, and that, you know, these gods were truly victims, of some kind of communal sacrifice, and that some kind of transgression was, you know, committed, you know, supposedly by the group or the community, right? And that, you know, in order to free the community of the transgression or the wrongdoing, they must be sacrificed, right? And what happens is, I guess, later in time, they become divinized, right? And he says that this is kind of the similarity that you see within Christianity, right? That Jesus is a victim, right? And he's blamed. He is accused of committing the sin of blasphemy. You know, basically, you're saying that you're the Son of God, or that you are God, right? And so that warrants punishment, right? And that, you know, later on he becomes divinized. But the difference for him is, I think, that Christianity exposes the story and the, you know, of the victim, right? And that the community around Christ is able to see that, right? And they tell that in the same, you know, kind of mythic narrative, but, you know, opening it up, saying this is what people do to each other all the time, right? Whereas I think he was trying to explain, or, you know, he did explain. I mean, he's a great writer, right? That the Vedas, and the, you know, the Brahmanas, and, you know, all, you know, the ancient texts, what they do is they continuously put layer on top of layer of a kind of the myth, so as to not expose what truly happened, right? So you don't know that the god was killed. You just know that, you know, Purusha is the god that, you know, who the you know, the caste system would kind of flow forth from, right? So the Brahmins and the you know, Kshatriyas, and, you know, the merchants, you know, the laborers and the untouchables, right? And yeah, so that's just a little background. Hey, did I get that right, brother?
I didn't hear anything that sounded bad to me. Now, when I looked up Purusha, I don't know anything about this god in particular. I mean, I listened to the book, but it says on Wikipedia, Purusha is a complex concept whose meaning evolved in Vedic and You say this word for me. I don't know it. Upanishadic.
Yeah, we should ask. Yeah, we need to get that verification. Let's get it.
Depending on source and historical timeline, it means the cosmic being or self, consciousness, and universal principle. In early Vedas, Purusha was a cosmic being whose sacrifice by the gods created all life. So you said in this text they were denying that there was violence, but it says that he was sacrificed. Did I get that right?
No, so they're not denying the sacrifice, but what they're doing is the him being a victim, or the the accusation that he did something wrong is not there.
Okay.
Right. So Girard is saying, I can't find where he was first a victim, where he was accused of something. Right. It just basically starts as the gods get together and dismember Purusha. You see what I'm saying? He can't find any I guess traces of the mock.
The inciting accusation.
Right. He says that he has to turn to another text, which comes later, and that is the Brahmanas and the story of Prajapati.
Now, is he suggesting that god is an earlier form of Purusha or a later form of Purusha?
I think that he's trying to say that the system is somewhat similar, because Prajapati also, I guess, gets dismembered or slain by his children, right, and his relatives for committing incest with his daughter, who I think is the sky or something like that. I want to make sure that I'm getting that right, John. Is that? I don't want to.
I'm no expert by any means, but I can certainly relate to what you're saying. I found traces of this development myself when I was studying in high school, and studies in mythologies were common over there. So one thing I found interesting is that you are probably familiar with the Hindu god of Ram. Ram is an avatar of Vishnu. So in the earliest mythological texts that deal with Ram, he is not actually a god. He is a human. But in later adaptations of that mythology, he was deified. So that could give you an indication that there were Girardian developments made in these mythologies. And another aspect, I discussed this with David the other day. If you think about Hindu gods, the Western mind visualizes this one god who has this head of an elephant. I think you're familiar with that.
Ganesh.
Ganesh, yeah. So Ganesh's story is very interesting because, you talked about these multiple arms, these characteristics. So how Ganesh came to have an head of an elephant, that's very interesting because the mythological text reveals that it was through violence. And I can't recall what he was incited of. He was the son of Shiv, the destroyer. And he, in a hunt, I think it was, I think he got beheaded in a hunt by a wayward arrow or something like that. But Shiv came to realize his mistake and found out what he had done, and he was resurrected by having an elephant being placed, replacing his original human head. So that's how he came to have that kind of it. So that's kind of how the mythology goes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that as you said, you kind of see this. It's through the initiatory act is a violent one, right? That's
right.
Kind of like how creation, comes about. It has to come about through some kind of a violent means. I know that in, I guess, in modern in contemporary Hinduism, that there are the three kind of I don't want to call it the Trinity, but the three main gods.
Deities.
Yeah, and that's the Brahma, Vishnu,
and and Indra. I think Indra was much more ancient. In contemporary Hinduism, I think Vishnu is.
Yes.
I think he's part of that trio.
Okay. And is Shiva part of that? Isn't the third one?
Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. I think that's the one.
Yeah.
Brahma,
Yeah.
Vishnu, Shiva.
Okay. Yeah. And
the preserver, the creator, and the destroyer. Brahma is the
Preserver.
creator.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that is the, you know, I guess what kind of you know, surprised, what he emphasizes is the fact that, you know, kind of the lack of anthropology to, or anthropologists to admit that you know, culture starts with sacrifice, right? And that myths are actually real events that took place, right? Rather than saying that they're real events that took place, anthropologists like to sum up the myths as just myths, right? They're just stories to tell some kind of ethical or moral lesson, right? They have no real, you know, their only efficacy is to basically, you know, point out prohibitions on this, you know, to the society, or taboos, right? Not real events that took place where there's a remembrance of that first, you know, victim, right? And you know, he he explains, you know, in a lot of ways that, you know, all our cultural institutions are rooted in that, in the ritual of sacrifice, right? So when we have a wedding, when we set up schools, when we you know, the law, you know, the legal system, you know, that you know, these are all, I guess, vestiges of some kind of, you know, sacrifice or sacrificial ritual. But you know, that is the question I have, because it's like, well, where, how can, you know, where can you say that you know, marriage has its origins or shows the vestiges of of sacrifice? You know, how can you say that school, right, is the vestiges of sacrifice? You know, it shows the vestiges of sacrifice. I'm trying to, you know, that's the I guess the one I can't really understand. You know, so I don't know, maybe you or David can help me understand that a little bit.
So marriage, you asked how marriage is a vestige of sacrifice, correct? Marriage
Yes.
or in schools.
Right.
Well, if I remember Girard, I think he explained it something like it's sort of like a restriction on your desire to mate with multiple women or something like that.
Okay.
So marriage could be kind of a restriction, kind of like how religion is a restriction on society, so that society does not spiral out of control in a mimetic desire, in an all against all kind of war.
Okay.
So we certainly find even in the Bible that earliest stages, man was a polyamorous creature, or you know, a polygamous creature. And I think marriage would be kind of like a check against that, and a religious imposition against that. So because I think there was a study that was carried out recently where they said that in polygamous societies, and you find them in mostly in the Middle East, there were more violence in those societies than there were in monogamous societies. So that kind of gives you a hint at how marriage came into
Right.
being.
Yeah, right. It's kind of like the idea of a guy kind of collecting a harem of women, kind of like a
Right.
not to play on the the Islamic idea, the Arab idea
It
of a
just
harem. Yeah,
ancestry.
I'm just I'm trying to. I guess I'm trying to go back even more to like a like a primate. You have, I guess it's
So
similar
that
with
was
primates.
so I was actually describing how monogamous marriages came into being.
Hmm.
So that monogamous marriages were most probably a later development. I
Hmm.
think a secondary development would be polygamous marriages.
Okay.
Before that,
Okay.
who knows what
Yeah.
strange things were going on.
Right. Yeah.
But to ask the Nephilim.
Right?
So you have the reason why polygamy would be a taboo for most of the people within the normal part of the hierarchy is that there's not enough. If you have a lack of women, it's going to create a scarcity, which is going to incite mimetic rivalry over the few available women that are available for the age of reproduction.
Hmm.
And that's going to incite, just like a plague or a famine does, when there's a lack of mutton to go around, the teeth are going to come out.
Right.
And so if you've got a plenteous amount of mutton for everyone in the village, things are going to be a little bit better. But when you have someone hoarding all the mutton and everybody loves that fatty mutton meat and they can't have it, of course, the hierarchy is going to protect that, because if he's the king, he can have it. And if he's doing the rituals that he's supposed to perform as a scapegoat king in that tribe, as a chieftain or what have you, then he'll be fine. But if he, if he is lower on the lower on the hierarchy, or if he runs afoul of the taboos that even he has to uphold in his special place as the scapegoat king, then it's going to incite scandal. It's going to incite a crisis of undifferentiation. That's why Donald Trump creates such a scandal for people, because he tweets a lot of misspelling and poor grammar on Twitter. And that creates a crisis of undifferentiation in which people who have been taught to worship the state, and especially the person who gets the popularity contest of the presidency. And so for someone of that high sacred status, to then misspell words and to go on attacks against people like Rosie O'Donnell, it is a desacralization of the vestige of the sacred that has been kept in the state. And so I think that's why, there's these rituals and these taboos and prohibitions that are put in place to preserve and to prevent out of control scarcity. Because out of control scarcity, whether it's females to marry for young men who have a lot of energy and can be up to mischief, or it's food or property, even to some degree, right?
Right.
Water.
Yeah.
If you don't protect those things from being too scarce, you're going to cease to exist.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I guess there is the idea that there's some kind of practice or ritual or tradition that needs to be kind of centered around that to kind of give it more of a, it's like, okay, when you get married, you have the whole ceremony and everything. Is it to give it a little bit more aesthetic in order for it to not seem?
It's to market out to the community that this is to not be transgressed.
Right. Okay.
So if people talk about, oh, I'm married, I did a private ceremony, me and my girlfriend were married. That's not biblical marriage. That's not religious marriage, because the whole point of doing it in a public ceremony is that you're going to in front of your community.
Right. For them to witness.
To witness that these two have been marked out as sacred. Don't violate the differentiation there.
Right.
That this is a unit now.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what religion is meant to protect, is differentiation.
so in Hindu marriage ceremonies, if you have observed, the ceremonies are carried out in a very, it's reenactment of mythology, and you will find some traces of sacrifice in that marriage in that ceremony as well. So in Hindu wedding ceremonies, there is a fire that is lit up in the middle, and the husband and wife, they have to have their clothes tied up, and they go around in circles around that fire. So that kind of indicates the sacrificial underpinnings of even a modest ceremony such as marriage.
That's meant to weed out the Chris Farleys among the community if they're going to trip up and fall in the fire. You just, hey, oh, whoa, he's gone. All right.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, John, because I do know that the fire ritual is very deeply rooted in the Brahmin, the ancient Brahmin culture, right? I think that there's what they call the puja, the the offering to the fire, to Agni or something like that.
Right.
And
so during the wedding ceremonies, the priest spills some grain into that fire.
Right.
Grain, and it's like a sacrificial offering.
Right. Yeah. And there's another, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. There's an old documentary of the fire sacrifice where the Brahmins, and I think they are in southern India in the Kerala, the Kerala region, something like that, and they perform this ancient ceremony that it's kind of like, I guess it's the fire sacrifice, but they kind of build this mound of bricks that kind of represents an eagle or something like that, and it explains their, I guess, how how they migrated, from a certain place, or how the god migrated from a certain place, and things like that. And they have to do all these rituals. So they have to do like the Soma ritual.
What's the Soma ritual? Tell people what the Soma ritual is.
Okay, so
most people know that's a drug, isn't it? That's for most people.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but this one I can't. I might not get exactly right because it's kind of hard to really understand what it is, and also I think, but the Soma was a plant that the ancient, I want to say ancient Indo-Aryan peoples used. So today that would be modern day India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran. They used, it was a hallucinogenic plant that helped to, I guess, to reveal the divine, right? To help them to see more clearly, the divine. And so, the way Girard explained it, it was, that the Brahmin will purchase the Soma from a person of a lower caste and put, and so as to not, take on any punishment for purchasing the Soma. The blame will be on the person who sold it to him, not the Brahmin himself. And so then when he takes the Soma and he crushes it, right, which is kind of a symbol of crushing a victim, he'll say, this Soma, I purchased the Soma to to read the hymns or to, you know, to speak the hymns, right? But he said, I'm crushing this soma, and this soma is representing the victim or the person that I purchased the soma from, so as to hide his fault, which is he's the one, the Brahmin or the priest is the one that's doing the violence, right? And he's the one that's acting on the soma, right? Pressing it, squeezing out the liquid, right? But he says that you know it's the person that gave it to me that is the one that I'm offering up.
It's redirecting the accusation.
Right.
It's redirecting the accusation to someone else.
Right. Redirecting the accusation to someone else, so as to not warrant the punishment of the god Soma. Right. So yeah, that's, you know, and you know, and he says that, you know, Soma is kind of also similar to, you know, it's like an intoxicant, so it blurs the lines, right? You can't really, there's no clarity, right? So it makes sacrifice more kind of you know, the lines between the moral and ethical, or what's right and wrong, right, is kind of hidden, right? So it's kind of like, if, you know, how, you know, me and David, we talked about Dionysus and the women, you know, drinking, right? So their acts kind of become, you know, well, it was me being intoxicated, so I didn't really know what I was doing. You know what I mean?
So the nature of crowds are like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They're hypnotized. They're intoxicated.
Right.
The nature of what is like that?
Crowd.
The nature of crowds.
Yeah. Okay.
The crowd is, the persecuting crowd is hypnotized. They're intoxicated, and that is probably what the plant serves during the ceremony.
Okay. Yeah.
To get yourself hypnotized, because the crowds aren't always there, right?
Right. You need
So
you
it's
need
kind of
something.
like it's like a legion,
Right.
you know, the legion coming into a single person.
Right. Yeah.
And you can see those.
Crowd.
You can see those on the streets when these crowds are beating the hell out of these shop owners, and, you know, because of the George Floyd riots. You know, wailing on these like elderly ladies, and you're like, what has happened here? You know, this is a loss of self.
Yeah.
How can you do that? You know, it's not even, you know, like that lady doesn't know George Floyd.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And the same goes for, you know, that's the reason why. But this is, what's that?
They're hallucinating another projection. They're hallucinating that old woman as a demon. You know, in their collective fervor.
Right. Or a witch or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting too, because Girard makes the point a lot in his work that you mentioned it earlier, Shannon, that modern scholarship always wants to deny the hidden violence behind mythology, and in their attempts to do so, it's always an attempt to perpetuate the mythic sacred in our time, which is so interesting, because you're like, because think about that on the surface. At first you're like, wait a second, how does it follow logically that if moderns reject the premise that there is a real cover-up murder behind the founding myths of all the world, how does it then follow that they do that as an attempt to keep the mythic sacred continuing in our own time? You're like, how does that follow? Can't you just reject that without doing it in the attempt to hide the remnants of sacred violence in our ideologies and institutions of our modern world? So maybe I have an idea, but maybe you guys can give me your take. What is the reason? How is that connected for those who are new to Girard, or, you know, toying with these ideas of anthropology from a mimetic perspective? How can it be that folks in modern scholarship today are hiding the violence of ancient myths as an attempt to perpetuate the hidden violence of our own time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, you know, because the thing is, I don't want to say, I don't want to make the accusation that they're purposely doing it or something like that. You know, I don't know if they're purposely doing it. I don't think, you know, but I think that they don't. I think they don't want to see the break within kind of cultural history or history of humanity. You know, lies within within Christianity, right? They want to place it on this idea of, like what we talked about, you know, um, earlier, the Enlightenment, right? Or, rationality, right? And so in order for them to kind of break away from the Christian message, that Christ kind of reveals these mythic stories of the victim within ancient history, you have to kind of skip over the Christian message, right? And you have to set it up in a way that, well, these were myths and we didn't really understand, they didn't really, understand it. They're mythical stories to tell, ethical lessons, right? If you just pay attention to the word, tell the story, if you talk about Little Red Riding Hood and when she went into the forest, right? That's a children's story to teach the lesson that don't go into, children shouldn't go into the forest alone, you know what I mean? Because there's wild animals, right? But I was watching this other, story in this movie, and someone kind of hinted at it and said that, well, maybe it was a story really about, the big bad wolf actually represented a minority community within that community, and she became an outcast, right, and lived in the woods. And in order to, weed her out, or to you tell the story in the sense that the woman is a wolf, right, not a real person that needs to be, that she takes the blame on the community, right? So she's kind of anthropomorphized or whatever, and she really deserves to be, done away with or whatever, right? But of course, people don't like to see that analogy. They just like to see it as a children's story, where you got this pure girl who's, ignorant of the world or what have you, right? And that seems to be the way I think a lot of academics, especially within anthropology, they like to tell the stories of the ancients in that way, right? That, if we can just teach a moral lesson about, don't go into the woods, or, like if you talk about Prajapati, right, and the incestuous, relationship he has with his daughter, right? That's supposed to be a lesson of don't commit incest, right? Not that there was really some kind of accusation put on a person and he was slain, and that story got hidden, right? Or the truth of it got hidden.
So I have to wonder sometimes if they're afraid to open Pandora's box onto everything, because going into these things very deeply, it'll throw a wrench into the whole structure. Kind of like how Trump got elected. It's literally like electing a Twitter meme poster into the most sacred office of all, So.
And he was accused of incest too. Like
Trump?
Yeah.
Wow.
They always said that he has eyes for his daughter.
Which one? The oldest one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an attempt to try to make him acceptable as a sacrifice. I want to get into at some point, not fully today, but we'll do a discussion at some point about the idea. You were talking about the fables. And I've always been interested in taxonomy of these different, the evolution of texts, right? That's one of the most fascinating things that Gerard has stirred in my interest, is the evolution and the taxonomy of text, looking at text like we would look at a fossil record for different forms of change. And I'm interested in understanding legends and how they fit in comparison to founding ancient myths. When you look at a legend story like Beowulf, you have a hero, Beowulf, and then you have Grendel, this troll, right? Have you guys ever read that story, Beowulf?
Yeah.
One of the oldest, Old English epic poems that we have. And when you read it, you're like, well, this is a lot more contemporary. So is this still hiding the sacred violence? But if you look at it, sometimes it's suggested that the hero is a scapegoat, right? Because when you read a fable or a legend, the hero goes off to fight the dragon, and he has a kind of resurrection moment when he comes out victorious. And then at the same time, what?
It's very interesting you mentioned Beowulf, because that was a pre-Christian myth, right? A pre-Christian fable, and it got developed over time. So you can see some insertion of Christian elements into that story. So maybe the things that you're talking about, where Beowulf is presented as a scapegoat, or that reflection of it, those could be later developments.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not saying, and to be fair, I'm not saying that the text itself reveals that Beowulf is a scapegoat. I'd have to read it more carefully. But I am suggesting that it is interesting how you're right. There's a Christianization in these legends that still preserves the sacred structure, but it's a little bit more easier for us to see. It's a little bit more corroded.
Yeah.
So when you look at Beowulf, you're able to see the structure of, basically, here's what I see Beowulf is. You want to see? Okay. You have Grendel. Grendel is this troll.
Yeah.
Grendel is the monstrous other, the one outside the camp completely, the one from another tribe. Beowulf is the community's sacrifice.
Right.
And you know that there's a lot of sacrificial rituals in which primitive tribes have people fight to the death. You see?
Right.
Yeah.
And that sacred sparring is their sacrificial ritual. And I believe that Beowulf is a more desacralized version of myth, where you can see what is hidden in ancient mythology when it says a god was torn asunder. It's kind of random.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas in this myth, you have a candidate selected for sacrifice who represents the people, represents the energy, the essence, the bad blood of their community, but he is also valorized, so he's not demonized. You see what I mean? He's not demonized as a scapegoat. He's valorized.
Right.
Because that's the Christian infection that gives you that Christian archetypal Christ-like figure that's starting to seep in just slowly into the way people tell stories, so that Beowulf is not demonized, but all the evil is contained outside on Grendel. And in that conflict, you see the two sides of the scapegoat as two characters. You see what I mean?
Well, and then the other thing is that Grendel is also, I think, isn't Grendel the child of the king? Right? He's the child of the king that Beowulf and his group come to help.
Right.
Right. So because the king had a relationship with the sea monster or something like that, right? And this child is this deformed child, Grendel, is born out of that. So Grendel is also kind of like royalty and a god, right? He's a demigod and a royal, right? And it's kind of like, he gets demonized for, maybe being, both or something like that. I'm not sure,
Right.
but maybe it has some kind of similarities to, say Purusha being, this giant, right? That, he has a, uh, you know, there's something that he represents, or there's something that he needs to be accused of, right? So he's, Grendel is accused of, I guess, eating people or something like that, coming
Right.
and feasting on humans.
Yeah, it's
right?
obvious. Yeah, it's obvious that Grendel is a scapegoat, but I'm always interested in understanding how it is that legends have heroes that die and rise again, but also monsters that they fight. That always bugs
Right.
me as a mimetic theory student, is the idea
Yeah.
of why are those separated in some cases? Because if you go to ancient mythology,
hmm
the flayer and the flayed skin, the god that we
Yeah.
talked about, right?
Right.
Or Dionysus, and it's a little bit
Yeah.
more
Duality.
ambivalent.
Yeah.
But then when you get into these more recent legends that are more contemporary in our history,
They're
you see,
separated.
you see more
Yeah.
of a delineation between hero and monster.
Right.
And I don't know if that's an impact of Christianity or not. I'd have to think about that some more, but I think it is. It probably has something there.
Yeah.
The idea of self-sacrifice being an attribute of Christian revelation. And no longer do we have to demonize the candidate Beowulf that we've selected to sacrifice to the gods. We can also represent them as a hero who is valiantly going off to risk his life, like Christ risked his life on the cross to save the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you don't have to have and maybe my memory is just not clear on Beowulf. There may be evidence of an inciting incident that Beowulf was he a trickster? Maybe that might be there. I don't know. There could be evidence that he was a little bit of a trickster. He did something naughty or
Yeah.
dirty in the early stages.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's definitely kind of like that. Free spirited kind of like, brave warrior that kind of like he rushes in, not really realizing he's gonna die or something like that. You know what I mean? He's kind of the
I don't remember. I
archetype
have to
of a
read the
Viking.
story again. Yeah, I'd have to read the story
Yeah.
again if there's like evidence that he did a crime or did something
Yeah.
naughty in his
Well,
early
that's the
stages.
thing is he in the end though he does go to that sea monster too, and he does. I think he does the same thing. He sleeps with the sea monster.
Oh my goodness. So it's a story that deconstructs mythology a little bit then, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I
don't know.
yeah, I mean it's hard to it's hard to say, because it's like, well, what does the sea monster represent? Does it represent, does the sea monster represent, women that have been outcasts, or what is the,
Or
and this, see,
maybe
that's this, yeah.
maybe they were drowned.
Maybe that, yeah. You see what I'm saying? That's the thing. It's like you can't, because if you start talking about, well, maybe they represent, and stuff like that, then it's like, okay, now you're getting away from this idea that, Ranger Gerard is trying to say, no, these are real victims. And something happened where they either kind of they turn into these divine beings who are either vengeful, or benevolent, or, what have you. And usually they're most of the time, I think they become both. Like they can become benevolent and vengeful. You know what I mean? It's like Apollo, and that's the thing about, like, people try to do this whole thing with Apollo and Dionysus, but it's like Apollo is also a god of plague. So he's not just a god of healing and medicine. He's also the god of plague and bringing disease. And so it's the gods have this dual character, right? And it's like you were saying, David, that maybe, I guess, maybe the Christian story kind of helps to separate the grotesque being, or the deformed being, or the evil being, or whatever, from the hero. You know
Well,
what
in
I
its
mean?
purest aesthetical form, yes, it would, because the Gospels show that God is not on the side of the crowd.
Right.
That God does
Yeah.
not demand the blood of his son.
Right.
In the purest aesthetical form, the aesthetic form of Christianity. I'm not talking about the doctrines that try to reinsert paganism back into the atonement, but
Right.
but in the purest image in the text, and the symbols that come with that. It's the earliest description is ransom theory. It's not the idea of God being this ambivalent, capricious, kill him. He'll kill you once and then he'll love you not, love you not. That's what pagan gods are like. And God is not transactional. God is self-giving.
Right.
God is, there is no destruction of the unity of the Trinity in the cross. In other words, the Trinity is fully present in the suffering on the cross to some extent, I think. I don't think you can completely disconnect the Trinity in that moment as if God was schizophrenic in that moment, you know?
Right.
I don't think you can do that, as some
Yeah.
people accidentally do.
Yeah.
Surit, I want to ask you to bring this home, since we've talked about Hinduism. What do you see the influence of the Hindu myths and what they're concealing in your modern experience in Indian culture? And number two, do folks who believe in Hinduism and practice Hinduism, do most of them believe in the reality of those gods, or do they see them in a similar light as the Romans saw the Roman pantheon of gods as, well, some of them believe they were real, but others were just kind of like, yeah, this is just what we do as a transactional bargain with the universe. And the Romans had gods for the door, the gods for the candle, gods for a bakery. You know, they had so many gods, but they were kind of like all transactional good luck charms in some degree. It wasn't like Roman pagans were all like fervently theologically excited about their gods to the same extent that the average Christian in the West might be about some of the doctrines of Christianity and being fervent for them. Although that's, of course, not very widespread anymore either. But so there's a few questions there, but what do you think?
It's very interesting because the reaction towards Christians in today's India is very similar to the reaction of the Romans to the early Christians. And I think most Hindus do believe that these mythologies are real in a very concrete way. They're historical. And Christianity, its influence is seen in a more kind of a subversive intrusion into the culture, where it's bound to, you know, undifferentiate the whole structure, and that's why it's seen as a threat into the culture. And what was the first question that you had asked?
I think you were asked, what was it about the question of the Shannon, do you remember the first question? The one I was thinking about was how the Hindu mythologies that we described, do you see their impact in the structures of the culture and governance of India today that you're experiencing?
I think there is some influence of, it's a bit of both actually, Hinduism and Christianity. You'll find it strange, but I think the Christian influences have mostly come from Islam. And the reason that is why, because self-sacrifice is considered a noble concept in Islam, even though they deny the crucifixion of Christ. So you do see a kind of the same, that same concern for victims in India, albeit it isn't as extreme as Christianity. There's still the concept of violence involved in that. So it's kind of a weird mix. I don't know how to characterize it accurately, but you could see it as kind of almost the kind of society that Japan has, where they have this Christian concern for development and concern for uplifting the backward people. I'm talking about the government institutions, of course, and at the same time, there is this crowd mentality present, and you can see it during elections. You can see it with the communal riots that happened recently in the 90s, even in the 2000s, between Hindus and Muslims. So at the ground level, scapegoating is very much alive here, but it's almost, it exists in a dialectical opposition uh, towards concern for victims. So there's a dialectical tension going on in there.
And so does Islam have the same subversive feeling that Christianity has in the Hindu culture?
Well, when the Islamic armies first came into India, it's, they certainly preached the religion and everything that came along, but uh, they sort of did not interrupt the caste system the way missionaries did. The Islamic rulers were kind of like, do your own thing as long as you pay the jizya, the tax that non-Muslims had to pay. So in most cases, they were left alone. But you could see there was an observation between the two cultures when they collided. And Hinduism, they had this rigid, uh, the Brahmin school system where only the upper castes were allowed to learn the religion, learn the ceremonies, and all the other things. And when Islam came into its territory, Islam brought with it a kind of universality of knowledge, where like you had access to their knowledge, what regardless of what caste you were in. So Hindus kind of imitated that. So with that, they came a rise of the Bhakti movement, where a special attention was given into worshipping your Hindu god, your Hindu deity in your own mother tongue, and also a personal devotion. So some of the first pioneers of the Bhakti movement, Bhakti means worship or devotion. So there's a personal devotion that is attached to that movement. So some of the first pioneers of that movement were Muslim saints like Kabir, and some of the Sufi saints as well. So there was, in a sense, kind of a subversion that had happened because of Islam.
Right. So it kind of it kind of brought a little bit of the, I guess, the Christian message.
It brought a Christian message, a filtered Christian message.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Me and David have talked about that a couple of times about, whether the idea that because Islam comes after Christianity, it contains some of the same messages of charity and forgiveness and mercy and doing for the those who have less, and of course like you were saying that the caste system seems to have fixed certain economic standings in place, or financial standings, social standings in place, where you can't really get out of that, right? But my question is, I hear a lot of people talking about, in the sense of the caste system, that when the British came, they kind of exacerbated the role of the caste system. That they kind of forced, the caste system in place, and that it was a little bit more loose than it was before the British got there. Is that kind of like, is that just a way to put the blame on the British, or do you think that's?
I think that is correct, because the problems that are there in modern day India, we Indians tend to project all of the blame onto the British, but that kind of proves to be a little bit ridiculous, because you have to then consider the plethora, the variety of armies that had invaded India before the
Right.
British, and they had literally ransacked temples and looted the gold and all these things, So I think the reason why we tend to scapegoat the British, and I'm certainly not saying that the British were totally innocent. They did a lot of horrible things, but we tend to scapegoat them a lot, because the British seem to admit to their guilt a lot more than the previous people do.
Right.
And
Right. Yeah.
so there's a kind of self-reflection that comes along.
Right.
That's kind of Christ infected.
Right.
With all the missionaries and all that.
Right. Yeah, David, I think you said something like that. It's like the West, or the Western civilization is the only civilization that feels, the guilt, or that recognizes its, the part it played in the violence or whatever. We talk about colonialism and things like that. So yeah, that's interesting, man.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you said to me one time, Shannon, off record, which you can talk about here. I thought it was a very good point about the beauty of a Japanese Bushido blade.
Right, yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I'm going to make a point out of it after you make
Okay,
that
yeah.
point.
No, I was saying something about how Japanese culture is very aesthetically pleasing, and I talked about.
I can't hear you too well. I can't hear you. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was talking about how Japanese culture, has this aesthetic to it that's it's very pleasing, right? It's beautiful, and so I had talked about the blade, the sword is being, it looks very nice, right? It's very clean, very pristine, you know what I mean, and all of that, but at the same time, it's a weapon, and I said that, it cuts off people's heads, so it's that it has this duality to it. You like looking at it. It looks nice, and it's fashioned very, with there's a lot of intricate stuff about it. It takes a long time to make, right? So it's that process, that, you see all the masters who create the swords, things like that, and how they take the time to fashion the sword and the hilt and the lacing and everything. But at the same time, the end result is, it's an instrument of death. Right? So that was my whole.
Well, I think that Japan has maintained its pristineness a little more than India, precisely because it's an island and it's isolated.
Right.
And India was caught in the crossroads of a lot of people invading and contaminating the unity of their sacrificial machine. You see what I mean? So Japan has been able to keep theirs a lot more elegant, at least to the world, right? Because when I was a kid, and still today, I romanticize Japan because it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And the culture is it's like a beautiful apple, it's just, it's magical. And the people I remember telling people, it seems like the adults are almost childlike innocence in their whimsical nature, the way they present themselves when you're an outsider. And I'm not saying anything against their culture. I'm just saying that it's so polished precisely because they had a relatively longer time to isolate and preserve their sacrificial machine and its hierarchy and the way you deal with failures and violators of their taboos. And then you say, well, why doesn't India have that same well-oiled machine? And it does, obviously, but it's a little bit, I think, it just seems a little messier culturally because of all the contamination of Christianity and Hinduism and other infections, right?
Right. It's like a big structure that is taped all over, in patches, like they fill it with cement in one part over here, and there's a crack here, they put a tape over it. And Japan's is much more pristine, like you described.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you guys joining me, and I think it's just interesting to take a look at anthropology from different cultures' perspectives. And I appreciate you, Surit, sharing those insights, having, being a person who lives in India. And do you have any other comments you'd like to add about anything? Or Shannon, do you have any questions or anything?
No, no. I just want to apologize about that noise. I'm pretty sure you guys can hear that. This out there cutting that grass. So, sorry about that.
No problem.
Some heavy construction going on there.
Yeah, man.
We had something like that going on with Tom Holland too. So.
Yeah, it's always something.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, guys, and thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure talking.
Yeah, thank you both, man.
Very good. Now, I have Dr. Yu coming up in 7 minutes. He wants to let you guys ask him some questions if you guys want to join. Can you do it? You don't sound interested.
No, I'm interested, but Dr. Yu, it's a hard one to follow, right? Physics is not my strong suit.
Cut off the episode here, so we do a new, fresh episode. If you have any questions for him, are you guys exhausted? I think you guys are beat up. I don't know what to do. Dr. You've been wanting to do something with me for other people, and I said, well, come on at 2:00 because I figured we'd be done around this time.
Yeah.
Let me get my physics degree first.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a hiatus on that right there.
Okay.
Quick. I'll listen in.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Ray.
All right.